Well, given that we're at 124, I think we can go ahead and move on to at least the next slide, start getting through the agenda. We can get to the minutes. And as you guys review the minutes, hopefully one more task force member will arrive. So this is Monday, February 12th, 2024. This is Andrew Amerlong, the Cannabis Program Manager, presenting. Today, we're mainly going to focus on a review of the draft outline of Article 73 and general requirements Part 1 and 2. We reviewed the general requirements from the first part. Move on here. You can see letters A through E here. We reviewed them at the last meeting and we're bringing them back hopefully for consideration. And then we can touch upon the remaining general requirements, some of which might not necessarily belong in this section. Thinking of weights and measures, maybe Catherine Vanderwall could provide some insight on that, but that's really a cultivation requirement, whereas we have numerous cannabis activities. So it might not be the most appropriate place for it. All right. With that said, we are going to go through the welcome roll call of task force members. There was a Board of Supervisors update that last Monday Maria had planned to present. However, there was the storms last Monday, and a lot of people were kind of dealing with a lot of emergency issues, so we decided to cancel the meeting. We would not have had a quorum anyway. All right, moving on. The agenda keeps going. We'll have public comment and adjournment after we get to the Board of Supervisors, our consideration of minutes, and then the two items mentioned. All right, I guess we can go ahead and start with a roll call of task force members. Is Ruby in the room? Do you want to go ahead and take this? Okay.
Yeah, of course. William Wise. Here. Catherine Vanderwall. Here. Rebecca Harper. Here. Jennifer Smith. Here yet. Nora Del Vaca. Here. Robert Geary. Not here. And then Fire District Representative.
Looks like I think I was sent an email that Paul Blues would be able to attend via Zoom to listen in, but I think Willie Cepeda had a conflict this Monday. So, yes. All right. When Jennifer or Robert does show up, let's just make a point to record the time.
Absolutely.
Okay, on to the next item, consideration of minutes. We can go ahead and start reviewing. If you haven't reviewed them already, I think maybe everyone in the room has already taken a look at it. We can't take a motion until we have a quorum, but perhaps we can open it up for discussion if there are any points to correct.
Be able to take public comment on it.
We could go ahead and open up for public comments. If anyone would like to make a comment on the minutes from January 22nd, feel free to do so now. Well, I'm not seeing any hands raised in the Zoom room. With that said, let's go ahead and move on. Maybe we can come back to this motion just to make everyone's time productive while we're not just sitting here. So, okay, on to this Board of Supervisors update. Again, Maria was going to bring this update last week after the board had reviewed the Actually, no, it wasn't last week because it was just this past Tuesday that she brought the item to the Board of Supervisors. So we added it to the agenda for today's meeting. However, due to some conflict, she wasn't able to attend. Essentially, the board reviewed all of the zoning and permitting recommendations that we had worked on through the table over the past so many months. The BOS did provide some insight and direction. They did not make an official motion. And again, we'll probably bring this back. Were all of you able to watch that this past Tuesday?
No.
No? Okay, well then, since Maria was really overseeing that item, we'll just kind of bring it back at the next task force meeting for her to give more details on. But for the most part, the majority of the recommendations were upheld with a few minor changes. So, okay, on to consideration of general requirements. This is the outline that we have been working with. As you can see on the left side of the columns under general requirements, those in bold, which include A, county permit requirements, B, state license requirements, C, business entity requirements, D, property owner's approval, and E, background checks. We have reviewed those. We discussed them at the last meeting. We're bringing them back hopefully for consideration and motion today. We do have Patrick Sullivan here as a guest speaker. He can maybe introduce himself at this point and kind of provide where he's going to bring some insight and expertise. Patrick, I'll leave that up to you.
All right, so I'm Patrick Sullivan. I'm the county treasurer tax collector. Andrew, do you want me to run through the points I have, or do you want to go item by item and
Let's go item by item. I'm going to bring up the PDF over the PowerPoint presentation here in a second, but that's what we'll get to right after this slide. But one comment for the background checks and clearances, I did invite Sergeant Keithley to come to the meeting, and he was planning on attending last week. However, again, we had to cancel the meeting due to the weather events. And is that Sergeant Keithley back there, or?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. You made it. I wasn't sure. I didn't recognize you in your casual clothing. So I'm glad you're able to attend. And all right, well, with that said, we will move on. Okay, we also have these older slides available, but let's go ahead and get into the PDF with the outline and the current language that we are looking at. So, Patrick, if you would like, we can kind of get through all of this permitting. Basically, applicable uses and permit it were covered in the table that the Board of Supervisors just reviewed and provided some insight and direction on to bring back to the task force. We'll get to that later, but then the next section are the general requirements for all cannabis activities. So as discussed in the last meeting, for county permit requirements, there are some general things that all use permits throughout the county will require, including compliance with Article 41 on general performance standards, Article 49 zoning permits, Article 50 minor use permits, Article 51 major use permits, Article 54 design review permits, and so on. You can see the list. One of the good points or good reasons to bring this in and have this up front is so that everyone's clear on all the other standards that they would have to meet regardless of whether they are working with cannabis or not. We do have an article dedicated to the environment. It's not listed there, but we also have California Environmental Quality Act, which covers it at the same time. So, it kind of comes up, one of the things, especially we mentioned before, general performance standards that really get into a lot of the technical details that people call out. Hey, you don't have this covered in your cannabis ordinance. Again, it's because it's covered in other sections. So for a motion on this consideration, and then maybe Patrick can provide some insight on it before we move on to the motion. Got three basic options here. You could choose to go with another option. The first one would be to provide an informative statement in this section summarizing these requirements as standard requirements for all county use permits. Or B, as Maria mentioned last time, as standard requirements, a statement is not necessary in this section. That's another option. Or C, provide an amended statement highlighting fewer or more than the listed requirements above. So with that said, I'm going to pass it back to the room. It is 1:33 p.m. and Jennifer Smith has arrived. All right, we do now officially have a quorum. So after we get through this item, we can go back to approve the previous minutes. But with that said, I'm going to open up discussion amongst the task force members and our guest speakers.
One point that I would highlight, my office doesn't have a strong opinion which way to go on this, but if you are going to include an informative statement, we would request that there is a reference to tax ordinance, both the cultivation and business tax ordinance in there. That's one of the requirements to follow. It is a permit condition. So if we're going to list the other ones, we would request that the tax ordinances be referenced as well.
Okay. That recommendation is noted. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Or we do have a hand raised in the Zoom room, but we haven't opened up public comment on this item just yet. So hang in there, Holly. We'll get to you.
I know it can seem redundant to have that informative statement in there, but I do think that sometimes there can be confusion for some cannabis folks that may not understand that there are other requirements that they need to go look at in addition to just the cannabis activities. But I don't feel super strongly about it. But I have spent some time like informing folks that yes, you do have to also do the other things too. So
CDD staff, myself included, can confirm that it's not always understood by the applicants. So,
but I don't know that they're looking at the ordinance, right? I mean, so.
well, the other argument would be it's their responsibility to do their due diligence and research these things and understand that's required. Any other comments? Should I open it up for public comment at this point? Are you guys ready for that? All right. Let's see, Ruby, I'm going to let you go ahead and open up public comment for Holly.
Okay. Okay, you can go ahead and talk now, Holly.
Oh, hi. Actually, I didn't really have a comment on this. I just wanted to say that we can't hear what's being said. So possibly, Andrew, for instance, we didn't, at least I didn't hear what Mr. Sullivan said. If you could just briefly restate something so it's a little bit clearer to us.
Okay. Patrick, I think that was the comment you had made about including the tax ordinance, referencing it if you are going to reference the other county requirements. Maybe you want to go ahead and reiterate that. And I think the microphone is up towards the laptop, so if you can kind of speak up, especially for those on the farther end of the room.
All right. Yeah. So the statement I was making was that our office doesn't have a strong opinion on whether or not to do the informative statement. Just our request is that if a statement is put in there to clearly reference both the county cannabis cultivation tax ordinance and the county cannabis business tax ordinance, if the task force chooses to include a recommendation for a statement.
Did you hear that, Holly?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
All right. Well, with that said, and without any other questions or comments, I'll leave it back with the task force to see if anyone is ready to make a motion.
Andrew, how long do you think this statement would be? That's my question, because if it's another like 3 paragraphs, I'd rather not add more.
I'm going to scroll down to the next section on state licenses. Here's one paragraph that covers state requirements. This could be shortened, especially since some of the departments list it well, this section looks generally okay, but sometimes they refer to state departments that no longer exist. But with that said, I think it would simply be a single paragraph. And if you want to have staff work with county council to draft that paragraph and take a look at it before making a motion, that's certainly, excuse me, that's certainly an option.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah, I think we should know what we're voting on.
Okay, we'll pencil it in for the next meeting. So. Okay, moving on to the next item, going on to state license requirements. As you can see, this section reads, state licensure and permits as required. A person or entity shall not engage in the commercial cultivation of cannabis without first obtaining a Lake County minor or major use permit, a state cannabis cultivation license, and applicable permits such as from Department of Cannabis Control, Department of Food and Agriculture, Department of Pesticide Regulation, Department of Fish and Wildlife, the State Water Resources Control Board, Board of Forestry and Fire Protection, Central Valley or North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, Department of Public Health, and Department of Consumer Affairs as appropriate. So the reason why a paragraph such as this is not provided for the county requirements is because one doesn't exist at the moment. So we do have this in our current ordinance, and I guess now's the time to take a look and open discussion and make any amendments.
Jen, does the Secretary of State still require a seller's permit too?
Yes.
Okay.
Also, as we're rewriting this, rewriting and writing new regulations as it represents manufacturing and whatnot, should we take out any language that is specific to cultivation, commercial cultivation, and rather have commercial cannabis business activities? Would be my question.
That could be an option. We could add that specific cultivation language when we get into specific development and performance standards for cultivation.
The other thing we may want to have in there is we've got major and minor use permits, but if we do move forward with temporary event licenses, that may be a zoning certificate, so we may need to add that in as well.
Yes, and that'd be a zoning permit, actually, but
But
similar.
I think it's best to leave this broad.
That was the recommendation that our office had as well, which was, of the options on here was B, cannabis cultivation being specifically referenced as one of the concerns too. If we're trying to list all the state agencies, this is not necessarily all the agencies. They've changed it so much. If we put out a list, even if we say such as or including but not limited to, I just worry someone's going to rely on that list and think that covers it. And we have no way to update this in a rapid enough manner to really offer advice to the zoning ordinance. If we wanted to, we could do that somewhere else, but I just don't think we want to do that here.
I agree.
Yeah.
In that sense, the first sentence almost covers it, especially if you add the clause at the end as amended. So
it should commercial cannabis activity possibly in that second line there instead of commercial cultivation of cannabis.
okay.
And then without first obtaining a Lake County permit.
Mhm.
And then, yes, permit, not even use permit.
I need to strike cultivation, a state cannabis cultivation
Exactly.
license.
Shall not engage in commercial cannabis activity without first
No.
obtaining.
Oh, the line above that, I had, or did you think that was an additional change?
Oh, are we striking that whole? I was just saying any reference to cultivation.
Yeah.
But
I think the reference to cultivation that they're suggesting be adjusted is in line 2, whereas I had incorrectly noted line 3, what you just mentioned.
Right.
And I'm back here.
So it would read, state licensure and permits is required. A person or entity shall not engage in commercial cannabis activity without first obtaining a Lake County permit.
The
Or
appropriate.
You could say
Yeah.
the appropriate permit.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly what Rebecca was saying, if you want to be all encompassing. So
Mhm. The appropriate.
county permit. So
And then just end it there and take out the rest.
Yeah, and state licensing. You need to have the state licensing thing in because there are still people out there that think that they can.
That's at the very first word, state licensure.
Oh. Yeah. My brain's not
Mine's just slowly.
catching.
I think most people I've talked to today are kind of in the same mode.
Okay.
All right. So Nara, it sounds like you have an outline of recommendation for a motion, if you want to follow through with that, or if there's still little details to discuss, we can go ahead and do those.
So, where's your motion? I'd make a motion to, I guess it would be B. I'd make a motion to accept a more limited
Or
first sentence. Is that what we're?
we could, or similar to the first section, we can come back with specific text based on what you just described and what the room described next week for an official motion on that text.
I think we've got the text in hand, so why don't we accept this and
okay,
we can get on it today. So I move
to you guys.
Move to amend this section to state state licensure and permits as required. A person or entity shall not engage in the commercial cannabis activity without first obtaining the appropriate Lake County permit.
And state license.
I thought we did state license at the beginning.
Right, yeah.
It does sound like it needs that.
A fairly damning mistake.
It is a weird phrase though, that beginning then. So we could move that first sentence to the end if we wanted. So it just reads, a person or entity shall not engage in commercial cannabis activity without first obtaining the appropriate Lake County permit and state licensure and permits as required.
Yeah.
Does that read better?
Yeah.
Okay. So I will restate the motion, move to amend this section 27.13 AT1, baby Roman numeral 2, lowercase a, to say a person or entity shall not engage in commercial cannabis activity without first obtaining the appropriate Lake County permit and state licensure and permits as required.
I would second.
Okay, all in favor? Or should we do a roll call motion, Ruby?
I believe we can just do all in favor.
All right, let's go ahead and give it a shot. So, all in favor? All opposed? All right, looks like motion carries. And just a heads up that reference to Article 27, Section 13, subsections and subsections, that's just more or less for a reference for where to find it now. It won't necessarily be outlined like that in the future ordinance. All right, on to the next item, business entity requirements. They're pretty straightforward. It was mentioned last time. There's a lot of detailed text, but I'm not sure if there's much to change or edit in this section. Let's see what I listed as some motion. Maintain the current language for business entity requirements or remove or add any sections of the current language. Staff doesn't have any specific recommendations at this time. When we get to the last section on processes and procedures, we do have recommendations on how one permittee with a business entity wants to sell and transfer it to another. We would like to require certain steps and procedures to make sure the new people coming in understand what they're getting themselves into, because we have seen issues with that. But with that said, it's not on today's agenda and it's not part of this section. So I will pass it back to the room for discussion.
Can we remove the language after natural persons who manage, own, or control the entity? Do we need to say the most common entities are? I would suggest striking that down to identify it and then go into the requirements for each type.
So you're talking about this section here that I'm highlighting in the beginning? Or
No,
your
one line
reference to-
down.
One down.
one
So
line
most
down.
common entities. Start with the most common entities.
Starting with the fourth line
Here we go.
Move there.
Yeah.
All the way through
to
identified.
the end of that paragraph.
Mhm.
So strike through all of this.
I think that's good.
Right, so we're saying we don't. I guess this maybe comes into play with some of the other requirements later. Because if some of the other requirements are staying the same, you would have to know. who
Well,
the
it's
persons
not
are.
changing anything, it's just removing that information in fact,
Okay.
because that's just telling you what types of corporations exist and how they interact, which isn't really necessary to be part of the ordinance. It doesn't say anything about how they're required to operate.
Are there co-ops now?
What's that?
But by removing that language in the case of an LLC that's owned by another LLC, that's then owned by another LLC. At some point in there, is there a demand made where it would get to the point where we do identify the natural person? Because by removing that, if you have 3 levels of ownership, we would not know who is behind it.
Can we add that into for limited liability companies? Requirements, there's
The number, there's also 5 under LLCs that says application or other documents submitted on behalf of the LLC must be signed by a managing member. Is that enough? Or?
Not necessarily,
No,
if it's a Delaware LLC, for instance, that wouldn't get you to the person that owns it. You could structure it in a way to evade producing that name. Which I have seen. So,
Okay, and the list of other members of the company could also be other LLCs.
yep,
Okay,
so I think just moving that language, the appropriate language to numbers,
5 and 6.
5 and 6 would be a better place for that language.
Okay, so moving the last part of this paragraph down to the subsequent
just say-
section for our LLCs. Is that all encompassing? Is it only LLCs or? I mean, it just seems like an example.
corporations would have it too, the same.
Okay.
LLPs as well.
LLPs, if you could have an LP, LP.
We have it right here.
Sure.
Or
Is there any
trust
one
as
of these
well.
that it doesn't pertain to?
Actually, that would
I'm
make
not, I'm not sure.
Okay, so then, can we just shorten it in the case of multi-layered or interlocking entities? The individual natural person who manages, owns, or controls must be identified.
You may want to ask county council why it was drafted this way originally. Just that might be something, because I think this was crafted to address that situation. But
Well, with that said, maybe, and for the sake of time and moving on, excuse me, I could bring this to county council and, find some more specific information as the way it was drafted. So does that sound like a plan, or what do you
Sounds
think?
like a plan, Andrew.
Okay. Everybody in align with that?
The
Okay.
line.
Let's keep moving on. Let's get past this. All right, next, property owner's approval. I know Patrick had some specific requests, which is why I invited him to this meeting, but also he's a really great person to have around for information for all of this stuff. So
I don't know if anyone really wants to hear what happens to him.
currently, the main concern, property owner's approval. And the way the language is stated at the moment, if the property where the cannabis activity is to be located is not owned by the applicant, written approval shall be obtained from the property owner or owners containing the property owner notarized signature that authorizes the tenant or lessee to cultivate cannabis at the site. A copy of the written approval shall be maintained by the tenant or lessee and made available for review by enforcement officials upon request. Written approval shall be renewed annually. So I think what had come up in conversation and was a concern from the tax collector's office is not having the property owners themselves as co-applicants. In a sense that, like we just mentioned, LLCs owned by another LLC, owned by another LLC, and LLCs obviously have limited liability and they kind of come and go. And where do we track some of the concrete information? Usually the use permit is tied to the land. So we always go back to the landowner anyway. Should it be something that we clarify here? And that's, Patrick, maybe you could speak in more detail to that and then you guys can discuss.
This is really starting to create a large amount of confusion, and especially as businesses have folded or not been able to continue to operate. Because this is a land use permit, it's basically defaulting back to whoever owns it. The permit is still operational. It's not like a business license because of how we've structured it. So you have the situation where the LLC or corporation that existed no longer exists or is no longer in operation. Now it's back to the landowner. But the oddity, because the landowner was not necessarily on the application, bills are still going to whoever the permittee was. When it's the landowner, every landowner in California, it's their responsibility to update their address with the assessor. So we always have a good address. If the landowner is on it, we could send the bill to them. Sometimes we're in a situation too where the landowner is contacting us wanting to know what the bill is. But that's been a little murky how we deal with that because they're not necessarily on the permit. So I've just found it's leading to a massive amount of confusion. I anticipate it only getting worse. And from having an ordinance, a tax ordinance that we can, actually enforce, it makes sense to have the landowner on there. I realize they're already giving permission, but then whoever the permittee is able to opt out of cultivation, to adjust the size of cultivation. You have the permittee speaking as if they control the permit, but then it's odd because if they leave, the permit flips back to the landowner who may not even be allowed to have it. Not to skip ahead, but that's the problem we run into with the background checks and clearances, is that you can have a landowner that's actually not eligible to hold it due to their criminal history. The LLC folds. Now we have an active use permit on a property with someone that should not actually even be allowed to have a permit. So for all those reasons, I just think we would strongly request that the property owner be mandatory to be included on the permit. It doesn't matter to us how many other people want to be a co-applicant. You could have other LLCs or corporations on it as well, but just that at a minimum, the property owner be on it.
I have no
Pretty
problem
thorough.
with that. I think it should be that way. I lease my farm here and the permit is in his name and we have an agreement, operating agreement. And I think that's how it should be. I was surprised to find that that's not the case everywhere because it is a land use permit. That would be my opinion.
What would be your proposed language amendment to this?
So there was the option for either A or B above. I didn't know how everyone felt about having more than one person on the application. And I guess that was one of the questions I would have for industry is, does it make sense just to have the landowner on there and then they do some sort of lease agreement with someone else? Or is there a circumstance where a corporation or LLC, someone else would need to be on the application too?
I might be in the minority in the industry. I just think that it's a land use permit that goes with the land and the landowner should be on it. And the operating agreement look at any other crop. How does that work when you have a vineyard management contract?
Sure.
So.
Granted, there are no special, I'm going to speak freely since it's been put to me, but there are no special permits that apply to us as vineyard managers. However, we do maintain contracts with all the properties that we work for in a management capacity. And so I guess my question to the room, if not to someone specifically, is what then happens if a person is not eligible to be permitted I mean, for whatever reason, they don't pass the background check or whatever the case may be. If the press here is for the property owner to be on the appropriate licensing here, what does happen if can an operator obtain a license as the applicant, but the property owner wouldn't qualify? I mean, it seems like a person who buys a piece of property cannot then hope for that piece of property to ever host under any such agreement or otherwise a commercial cannabis operation. Is that correct?
I didn't want to skip between the sections, but the whole you're talking about is what has now become possible. That you can have someone that it should be illegal under our ordinance to have a permit due to their criminal history, who has sort of come full circle and ended up holding the use permit.
Interesting.
Arguably, I don't know if that's
without any sort of assumption of nefarious intent. I'm just like, it seems one could arrive at that by way of clerical actions. No? Yes. Okay.
Is there a way to remedy this through a business license application that would make this cleaner? And then the other question would be for state applications, are there issues with landowners, property owners not wanting to be listed as an applicant for a state cannabis license? Then maybe they may be listed as as a financial interest holder, that they may own a property that at some point becomes a lab or something, and then suddenly they aren't able to do that. I don't know that that's ever going to happen.
That's a quagmire though.
Yeah.
I would also say to that, oh, sorry.
I guess I think the preference should always be for the landowner to maintain ownership of the permit so long as they can. And if that's not the case, then I don't know. You're going to have the operating entity apply for it.
Yeah.
And I know there's some cases where some landowners don't want their name on a cannabis permit.
Yeah.
Now that I think about another situation, even though it's on their land. So yeah, you've got a pickle.
Yeah.
Closing taxes.
There are counties that have a business license, cannabis business license, and that might address some of those issues, but it doesn't get around the fact, because we're doing as a land use permit, it seems kind of crazy for someone to then not want their name on it. You're giving permission for it. I mean, I feel like you need to fully own it. And I don't think, to be frank, I'm not sure we ever meant for that not to happen. I think in the beginning, at least, all the landowners were listed on the permit. And then over time, we started to get different lists where people had changed it. I mean, we can't even figure out how to send a tax bill because we've had the address changed multiple times and the last ones are no good. So we're getting to the point where a large number of our bills are being returned and we don't even know who to send to.
Yeah, and cannabis licenses and cannabis permits are weird in land use because yes, it's a land use permit, but it doesn't really run with the land, it runs with the applicant, right? Because at the state level, like the use permit doesn't remain, according to state law, doesn't remain with the land if that applicant at the state level leaves that location. It's a weird kind of.
So the state license stays with the person?
It doesn't actually get to stay with the person either, but it also doesn't get to stay with the land. If that person leaves, if the applicant for the state license were to leave that location, that use permit doesn't stay with the land the same way that like at a bar, right? That a bar would still be able to be a bar and restaurant or something like that. That use permit doesn't outlast the applicant. It's weird.
I think you have a situation where the county use permit is staying in place and one business shuts down loses their state license. A year later, a new one comes in, gets a state license, operates on it. So that county permit, from my understanding now, is continuing to live on in the background, but it's no good until it's paired with an active state license.
Exactly.
So I don't know, I guess I'm thinking too, there have been owners, part of the reason people have changed it with CBD, I think, is sometimes, I don't know whether it's for tax purposes, there have been companies that wanted the tax bill in their name. So I think if we're trying to go for language that probably works for everyone, I would say that the property owner of record must be on the application. And there can be additional co-applicants who are jointly and severally liable in terms of a permit. Because if people wanted to, that gives those companies that want to be on the permit the option to have their name on it. I don't know that they would, but I guess right now I don't have a reason for them not to be on it from our office perspective.
We do have two hands raised in the Zoom room, so whenever you're ready for public comment.
And it's the property owner approval section that's hairy for you, or is it a different section of because the owner approval is really should just be an acknowledgement that you know that commercial cannabis activity is going to be taking place on your property. That's generally been, and so that has very little to do with the business tax requirements for that property, but more to do with the fact that they want to ensure that the owner of the land is aware that this activity is taking place there.
Shouldn't they also be aware of like any consequences, like if that business just folds and goes away and leaves like environmental mess or?
Yeah, or there are some issues with where people are holding the land isn't owned, right? It's and the bank then says, hey, that's cannabis activity, that's federally illegal. You can't. And they'll there's sometimes you can sometimes pull a loan.
I think the purpose of this ordinance isn't to bridge the divide between legal and illegal banking for the cannabis industry. Right? Like it shouldn't be, that's not what we're sorting out here. That's an issue between the property owner and the lender.
So I guess this, bottom line, if this is titled property owner's approval, so I guess at that point, you really just need to know that the property owner is allowing a permit, whether they own it or not, and that they understand that the taxes are tied to the property. Maybe go like, would that be a solution?
I mean, I think they need to be signing it as an applicant. It's their land. So
it's not just approval, it's approval and liability.
Right.
Question for you.
Sure.
In instances where there would be a business entity on a property that was also owned by someone who didn't wish to be part of the business that was like, wouldn't the tax collector's leverage on that property be tied to the property, not to the crop, not to the business entity, not to the anything? I mean, like, if your office has trouble getting people to pay their bills, your office has the power to seize upon property. Yes? No? Why wouldn't that be like the thing your office wants in the case of collecting on this revenue as well?
So it's different whether the business owns the property or not. If a business owns a property, it's secured to that property, like your property tax bill is that.
Sure.
If you're leasing the property from someone and you have a business and the owner has nothing to do with it other than the lease deal, then it's an unsecured tax. And we can't just enforce it against the land. We have to do, bank levies, tax intercepts. We can seize property, seize equipment, but then that gets into the issue here that we're allowing LLCs within corporations. So we have companies that do not exist in any other way than the paper to hold that lease.
Sure, fair enough.
And so it is a problem for us. Long term, I would argue it would lead to structural instability for the entire program.
I see.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah. No.
Should we take public comment? See if they have ideas.
Yeah.
All right. Ruby, you got public comment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
All right, Holly Harris, go ahead and speak.
Oh, hi there. Thank you. I do tend to agree that the property owner maybe should be a co-applicant just because violations go with the land, et cetera, and they have to know what they're getting into. So it needs to be more than just written approval that they're allowing cannabis to be on there. And then my second thing is that this is so important. I think maybe, possibly Patrick could speak with county council or Andrew speak with county council and come up with a proposal to come back, for consideration.
All right, thank you, Holly. Next we have Aaron. I'm guessing that's Aaron McCarrick. So.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
Thanks. I was waiting for the unmute. Lower my hand. Yeah, Aaron McCarrick, Clear Lake. Just to give some clarification on why somebody might not want to put their name on a license. It's something out of our control. It's not federally legal. So let's say somebody has a green card, or let's say somebody has federal grants, or let's say, as I think Nara and Jen mentioned, it can be, you could possibly pull a title on their, pull the title of the property or a loan or something like that. So there's multiple reasons why somebody might not want to be on there. The state requires us to provide a lease and assign a notarized, the city of Clear Lake, I think, made you do a notarized, like that this person is aware of what's going on. And then there's the other thing about, there's landowners, but there's also just general rentals. If you're in a dispensary or some sort of like more of a manufacturing where it's not a land, it's not a crop, you have landlords. And so then are you asking the landlord to put their name on them? And so I'm not offering, I don't have a solution. This is, as I think Jen mentioned, this is a quandary here. Maybe, Patrick, there are other ways to put liens on the business itself. And I believe the state, correct me if I'm wrong, Nara and Jen, I think the state does not allow you, they dig deep on any financial interest holders, any LLCs. You can't just put an LLC on there. You have to have a point of contact and a human person, and you have to show the levels of membership within the LLC. I don't know what happens if it's like a infinite void of LLCs, but the state does make you put somebody down. So that's just my comments to help with any clarification. Again, not much of a solution there, but there are reasons why folks don't want their names on it, and there are questions about how deep do you go. So thanks. Landlord, not deep on the LLC, that's good. You need to have a human, but what level do you have people sign on to cannabis on their property?
All right, thank you, Aaron. We now have Janae Freed, who's actually from the Water Board. I work with her quite often. So, Janae, go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
All right, found it. Hi, I just wanted to give input from our side over here. We have our application process is kind of on the honor system, but we do go check Land Vision, which is our property owner database, to see who owns the property before we permit it. And our permit, our notice of applicability, actually will list both the operator, whatever entity they choose to put down, and then also the landowner. And our language reads that the landowner is the one that is ultimately responsible for remediating any violations on the site. And oftentimes we have operators that disappear, or there was landowner operator conflicts and landowner, asks them to leave. And then, so we need the landowner's contact information to proceed with cleaning up the site or terminating the site, which also requires cleanup. So I don't know how that fits into the county. I just thought I'd provide that.
All right, thank you, Janae. That was some pretty good insight. Just for the sake of time, I just want to remind everybody we have about looks like 17 minutes left, and we have one other item to get to where Sergeant Cleathy can provide a lot of insight. Maybe we should bring this one back on the agenda like the others, because it sounds like it's going to be a deeper dive into some of the details. So.
Yeah, I'd like to see some language from the treasurer and county council on this.
All right, sounds like a plan. Okay, next up, background checks and clearances. Our sheriff's department takes care of this for the most part, so they could provide the most insight into this process. Currently, I hope you all had time to read the language. It's a little longer, so I'm not going to read it out to all of you. We've got a couple, well, just about a page of language. And in terms of, what was brought up last week is how effective this is. I know I've heard some supervisors mention they don't want to see it in there. I have also seen other reasons, other situations where it was nice to have a live scan background check because some people were making accusations about certain people, and it was good to be able to go back and check that. So, with that said, before opening up for discussion, Sergeant Keithley, would you care to provide some insight into how the process works on your end and how effective does it help the sheriff's department address any security issues? The floor is yours.
So they get their live scan done, and basically I get a copy of whatever crimes they've committed. In order to determine if they're eligible for a permit, there's the BGI guidelines, which is a whole bunch of crimes that they would have to, heinous felonies basically, that would prohibit them from obtaining a permit. Not a lot of people get denied, but there are some who do. I think it's a good thing to have. I know the state checks it as well, but a lot of times I've missed it on reviews where people I denied them or I didn't deny them, and then the state caught them and denied them because I had let them go. And I've had that vice versa. I just had one the other day that he had a permit issued to him out of Mendocino County and a state permit as well, and he is trying to get one started here. And I denied his permit because the first crime in there was possessing something he shouldn't have possessed, but it said with a prior felony. Nobody had ever checked what that prior felony was because it wasn't on his criminal history report. It turned out to be okay, but he actually had another felony that didn't show up. So I think it's nice for the sheriff's office to know who they're dealing with when we're going to these places with these permits. Like I said, they may not be denied. There's a lot of crimes that are not on the list that I think should be on the list where people shouldn't be permitted. Obviously, that's not our problem because we didn't make these rules, but it's nice to know where we're going, what crimes are coming. I mean, even if I don't get to deny the permit or approve the permit, I can still say, hey, this is what has been on this property. That way, when we go to do a check on the property or something, we know what we're getting into.
All right, thank you. I guess we can open that up for a broader discussion. It could be something we could put a little more thought into as well to make changes, add this or that, or get a little more specific in certain areas. Sergeant Keithley, just one last question. Is there any recommendation you have to maybe add this or that, or from, you've got a unique point of view that we don't always get to see. So
I would like to see it remain, even though it creates a lot more work for me. I think it should remain the background check for the county.
So to which level? I'm gonna jump in here. Just owners, managers, because we run into this situation where I feel like we're being forced to lie because any large farm is using farm labor companies. So how I talked to the previous sheriff and we thought, well, some of the ideas we came up with, any employee that's on the farm less than 60 days doesn't have to have a background check. Like, how do we work together on this and the county knows that owner and operators are cleared, but allow the liability of our day laborers on the owner operator?
I don't have an answer for that. I know that I've been to numerous permitted sites and there's none of their workers have gone through the background check.
So then what did you do in that case? Anything?
What am I going to do? It's they've got to get their product done. It's their business. They went through correct hoops, everything, but finding that labor, I understand what farm labor is. I understand that it's
So then.
it's difficult to produce.
So
workers.
again, then why I feel like we shouldn't have something that can't be enforced in this. And so I don't feel like every employee should have to be background checked.
With
Because
CDD, sorry, just for some clarification, when we're out on our annual inspections and we do come across an employee that we do not have on record for a live scan, we request that. I mean, we usually do a follow-up. We send them our report and we notice, here, this isn't in compliance. You need to address this. We do quite often have them within a week or two, or however many weeks, I guess, get back to us with a live scan check, but it's not always checked, and it's hard to catch every person. And it is one of those things. It's just a tricky situation in terms of enforcement and compliance.
let's not make it tricky. Like, I'll admit what's really happening. I realize I'm putting a huge target on my back by saying this, but come harvest time, like there's no way to get 50 background checks. You don't even know if the same 50 people are showing up the next day. The culpability is really on the farm labor company. They're the one paying their, making sure their taxes get filed and whatnot and collecting their social security numbers. I just think we need to treat this like any other ag crop. And when it comes to harvest, like we just have to all admit to one another that there's going to be people on the property without a background check. So now I'm fully expecting an inspection in October during harvest. But I just like let's not.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I understand that.
Yeah, and there are non-employees too, like people that are like brought in by friends, people that are like, I show up on a farm and it's like, yeah, none of these people are listed in Metro. None of these people are, and some of them aren't necessarily being paid. Some of them are. If there's
let's not go down that path. I'm just saying that let's just call it what it is, and let's bring it above board so that we can operate above board, and we're not all thinking we're fooling anybody, because we're not, and don't force us to lie.
Is there language that the sheriff's office could add that put some additional liability on, like you said, on managers and owners to?
I mean, and like when I talked to Sheriff Martin about it, he's like, okay, so now you want me to maintain a list of 60 people that are going to work for you less than 60 days, and like the tracking of it's ridiculous.
Yes.
But also, I mean, what's that?
I have a question.
Yeah.
That's right. The background check, is that just a one and done?
No, it's every 2 years.
Oh, it's every 2 years.
Yeah, it's a live scan.
Okay.
And so it's really expensive. I mean,
Oh,
it's expensive.
What is it, $147?
Yeah, I had to do it to upload someone in the Metro.
So I just think that we should have this discussion while you're here, and hopefully we can start to find some middle ground on this. The state requires the owners, anybody that owns more than 20% of the farm, to have a live scan.
What if you put in regular employees in here and then provided a definition for what regular employees are?
Mm-hmm.
The W-2 employee, distinguish between a W-2 and a versus 1099 contractor.
Regular employees that, it could be any definition, whatever we want the definition to be. So you just put all regular employees, managers and owners must have a background check. And then we provide a definition of regular employees.
We do have 2 hands raised in the Zoom room if you're ready to open it up for public comment. And we have 7 minutes left. So we can go over if you guys are willing. I just want to be sensitive and aware of everyone's schedule. So public comment, I'll take that as a yes. Ruby, I got it. Margot, go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
Thanks, Andrew. Thank you, everybody. I would just like to express support for a comment that's already been made, and that is, we should offer support, or we should offer regulations that make sense. period. But at the same time, we should not sacrifice public safety just because right now the rules are not very manageable. So in other words, we should maintain these background checks as Sergeant Keithley has recommended, but perhaps we don't need them for farm laborers. I'm not sure. I'm interested in hearing more discussion on that, especially since they're only there temporarily. I don't know what kind of danger having them on site without a background check would be for the harvest season. So I offer that as my comment. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Margot. And now we have Sarah Bodner. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi there. Good afternoon. This is Sarah Bodner, Policy Director for the Lake County Cannabis Alliance. And Margot, I really appreciate that comment because this is very much a balancing act between managing different needs. And remember that we're talking in cannabis, ultimately about agriculture. And the nature of agricultural harvest is that you have a sudden need for labor that can be unexpected and urgent. And in practice, getting an entire crew of day laborers background checked in time is completely infeasible. A storm's coming and you need to pull your plant sooner, all kinds of things that as agriculturalists you're familiar with. So that's what we're striving for, is to balance the need to ensure that there is, due diligence, obviously at the owner operator level. And, if the county wishes to proceed in this way where, it's all full-time employees. So what I'd like to offer is that what we've done in the past, LCCA has drafted some possible language and then brought it forth for the task force to consider. And now that we've opened up the discussion, perhaps we could do that for the next meeting. And we could also look at what other counties do that have a lot of cultivation, because this tends to be most pertinent when we're talking about growers. So we could come back with some different language and maybe have some follow-up with law enforcement to tease this out a bit further. And then the task force could have some proposed language in front of you at the next meeting. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. With that said, we are at 2:26. I'm not sure if we're going to get through a lot of this. And as Sarah had mentioned, she would like to see it come back to the next meeting. We don't have 2 weeks. We only have 1 week since this is a special meeting. I'm thinking I do have some pretty good marching orders to bring the specific county requirement language to county council for drafting a paragraph there, to bring those business entity requirements to county council, as well as property owner approval and now background check language. I can definitely do all of this. I don't think it's going to get done in time for the next meeting. Maybe it shouldn't. We should look into it and make sure, it gets the proper time that it deserves. So with that said, I'm going to leave it back into the room. Nara, you have a comment?
I do. Yeah, I also want to emphasize the difference between the needs of a cultivator here and safety requirements for a dispensary where there's easier access to cash and high value items. And so that may be the kind of operation where we definitely want to have employees background checked. But we may want to, call out seasonal employees or something like that as just not feasible to necessarily background check.
And I don't know if we choose to move forward with defining regular employees, but as a compromise, that could potentially include seasonal supervisors only. Your supervisor is usually going to be the same throughout the season. If you're working with an FLC, if you have 1 or 2 crews, you'll have the same supervisor for those crews. Just so that could be.
As an anecdote, this whole seasonal thing seems like it'd be sort of tricky / extremely dubious on a legal standpoint. I'm all aware, but I mean, we don't get to treat employees differently whether they work for us for 2 weeks or 2 years. It's just, that's the thing that I know from operating a business in this county. But I think the 1099 versus W-2 is probably a pretty interesting distinction, and makes sense. But I just, anyway. No.
And I know for the tax code, seasonal is 6 months or less. So we can look into that as well.
Okay, well, sounds like a lot to look into, but is everyone comfortable with not making a motion? I think no one wants to make a motion at this time, but to give staff our regular marching orders and go find out more information and bring it back to you.
Yeah, I'd like to see if the sheriff's office has language that they'd like to suggest or send a notice to, not to put more on.
Not at this time.
Okay.
Okay, well, I'll be following up. It looks like I've got a lot to cover with County Council. With that said, our next scheduled meeting, tentatively for this Tuesday, but I was just thinking about something. Oh, we do have some public comment. There was one more. Guess. I think that's Angela. Angela, do you want to go ahead and make a comment?
It is. Thank you, Andrew. I'm going to jump back to the background checks. Well, we still need to recognize that it is still a federally illegal crop that we're dealing with here. And so I guess I'd have to agree with Sergeant Keithley that it should stay the way that it is for now. If a live scan is good for 2 years, what prevents somebody from just getting one every 2 years? And then that also ties into Patrick's worry about the liability for a property owner. If there's no liability for a property owner and you're letting people onto the property for something that is still recognized as federally illegal, are we setting ourselves up? That aside from my regular public comment, I wanted to find out if we could do something about setting a time limit for a quorum. Maybe like 1:15 if there isn't a quorum, just adjourning the meeting, but waiting until 1:30 I think is a little excessive, because now we only got an hour in instead of an hour and a half, so maybe that's something to consider in the future. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Angela, and that is a good point. I will get some clarification on that. All right, well, I guess with that said, any other comments from the task force? All right, well, I'll be in touch. The last comment I was going to make is that we are using the webinar link. It's the same link that we use for the Planning Commission hearings and the Board of Supervisor hearings. There were some comments as to why can't everybody be seen in the chat. And again, just like your Board of Supervisor hearing, you're not seeing everyone in the chat. There's some public limitations on that. With that said, our next meeting is scheduled on Tuesday during the Board of Supervisors. So I'm going to have to double check that we do have the link and we're able to move forward with that meeting. So you'll get the agenda, or if not, we'll send you an update here by Thursday. So there's one more hand in the Zoom room. I don't know if you guys want to adjourn the meeting or hear the last comment.
We haven't taken public comment on it.
It's kind of been on a topic by topic issue as usual. So let's see here. Sarah, if you want to go ahead and make your last comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that when we're in the Zoom room and we can't hear, there's no way to communicate because the chat function is disabled. And so it's not the request is not that we see all the chats from everybody else, but there is a way for the county to activate a one-way chat where it can just go to the meeting host so that we can tell you when we cannot hear the microphone in the room.
Okay, well, we'll look into that. I'll touch base with Ruby and IT on that one. So
thank you.
All right, thank you, Sarah. I guess with that said, thanks everyone. We'll be back to it soon enough, and the meeting is adjourned.